locally, how does that work? How does it work? You know, it's one thing to see how GE does it. GE's got, you know, millions of dollars of resources to put into developing all these things. But they're, with you know, not a ton of effort, you can do things with an iPad that probably could directly impact either the way you interact with clients or service clients. And I think sometimes having a local case study helps to kind of bring that home a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about this client of ours and what they did with it. So across the street, across Sheridan, in the original Sheridan Meadows, is the offices of ING, the financial services company, and they're their local Buffalo office. And within ING, they have different teams of folks, and one of the teams they have is Integrity Financial Services, Team IFS they call themselves. And Gary Witten is the principal there with his son, and primarily what they do is specialize in doing financial planning for college-level educators, so they're focused on the education market. And they go out and they do, you know, retirement plans and financial planning for those clients. So we got introduced to them through the Apple Store, actually, because we have a relationship with some of the corporate folks out at the Apple Store, and Chris's relationship with those guys. And the Apple Store guys called us and said, hey, you know, you should call these guys over at ING because they wanted to do some things with an iPad, but they needed some help and they had some ideas and they were looking for someone to kind of give them some assistance. So we kind of went out and met with Gary and his team, and he had two kind of objectives that he wanted to do. He wanted to improve the presentation of services to their current clients. So they're out in the field, they're meeting with professors and administrators of schools, and they wanted to improve the way they present their services to those folks. They also wanted to take a lot of their, what were currently paper-based forms, and they wanted to kind of make that more electronic. And Gary is kind of I would call him a bit of a visionary. He really had a sense of where he wanted to take that interaction process with the client and what he wanted to do, and he wanted to do it with an iPad. That was his sole mission, was I want to do this with an iPad. So those are the two things he wanted to achieve. What they did, this is kind of the way they used to do it. So what they used to do is they would print out broker and financial reports at their offices for each client, and then they put them in literally a blue folder. It was a blue, you know, manila folder. And they would take that folder out to each client meeting, and they'd open it up, and they'd go through the whole presentation with the client, and they'd have different types of reports in that thing. And that's how they interacted with the client at every meeting. They also had a number of standardized paper forms that they had to use from the various financial companies that they work with if they wanted to authorize a transaction or do certain things like that. And they kept them in like a paper, you know, like an accordion file. And they put them in their trunk. They'd go in for their meeting. They'd have the accordion file, the blue folder. They'd walk in, they'd do their meeting, and that was the way that they had done business for years. Okay? So they also wanted to, you know, they all had ING emails, but they wanted to kind of personalize their company, their group within ING. And they wanted to have their own email domain, and they wanted to kind of separate themselves from the pack a little bit. So they wanted to have a teamifs.com email address, and they wanted to be able to, because it's a small group, it's like 8 people, they wanted to be able to, you know, share contacts, calendar items back and forth all the time. They've got an admin support staff in the office. They've got 3 people that are out in the field meeting with clients, and they wanted to be able to schedule calendar meetings for those folks. They wanted to be able to share a common contact file in the office. So that's kind of the way that what they wanted to do, but they just didn't have a way to do this at the time. So that was kind of what I call the old school. This is the way they do it today. And this is very much an evolving initiative for them. And I would say he's probably about 85% of getting done what he wanted to do originally. He's pretty darn close to getting it done with our help. But he's the kind of guy who, once he gets this nailed down, he'll come back to us with 4 other things, I guarantee you. He's just a really interesting fellow. So what we do now, and what they did, was they deployed iPads and iPhones to all their staff who interacted with clients. They issued them an iPad and an iPhone. We upgraded their existing Windows infrastructure, so they had an older Windows infrastructure, and we put in Microsoft Exchange for them through Microsoft Small Business Server. That gave them the ability to sync emails, contacts, calendars amongst all their devices, iPads, iPhones, or their desktops, and be able to share all that with all their staff. So they all have access to that. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, the technology that we use for that is called ActiveSync. It's native to Microsoft Exchange. It's built in. It's part of the package. You get it for free. All you have to do is get the right device to sync to it, put your security on top of it, and you can have the capabilities to do all that. Okay? The next thing we did was we put in an Apple server in their office so that they could have secure access to their files back at the office, okay? And they could share those files amongst all their team. So they didn't want to have files and documents just residing on an individual iPad. They wanted to be able to push those documents back and forth. Well, integrating an iPad with a direct Windows environment is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So we basically put in a middle environment using an Apple server to allow them to do that. But the Apple server and the Windows servers integrate with one another, okay? So we can share documents back and forth between those two environments. And then they can access them on the road. So basically, what we did is, instead of having their paper blue folder system, we implemented a digital blue folder system for them. So now, that is the way that they go out and they do documents and interact with their clients. So what happens is that admin staff creates what normally would have been printed out for reports that go into the blue folder, like a report from one of their brokerage houses that listed their allocation for the year. That's something that they would review with the client. So instead of doing that now, what they do is they print it to PDF, they put it into the blue folder on the Apple server, and then when they're out in the field, they just pull up the client's folder on their iPad, and then they can go in and review all those documents with the client right from the iPad. Okay? Go ahead.
Let me play devil's advocate for you.
Sure.
When I hear the word server, it gives me heart pains. Why couldn't we just use Google Docs? Why couldn't you just use Google and skip servers, and it saves the exchange money, $50 per user per year, and everything is in the cloud?
You could.
Is there an advantage of doing it the way that you just presented?
Is there compliance issues in terms of it
Yeah.
being a
Can I jump in
financial
there real
advisor?
quick?
Yeah, but let me just, I'll give you my thoughts on it, and then, I'm happy to have everything. Most of the clients that we work with them in a managed relationship, meaning that they don't want to deal with setting that stuff up.
Sure.
They don't want to have the hassle of dealing with, how do I set Google Docs up, how do I do this, how do I do that. So for us, it's much easier for us to help them achieve the objective if we use the kind of technologies that we do today, which is Exchange,
Sure.
But there's nothing to say that you couldn't. Absolutely could, certainly could. And ultimately, a Windows server, I think it was what, $999 for that server.
For which one?
What was the Windows server, the cost of it?
I don't remember.
From a cost perspective, it's pretty minimal.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
But to answer your question a little bit more, the reason why you would want it yourself is for a lot of reasons. Compliance, archiving your data. You are always in control of your data. This data that's going through here is important to your business. If something happens and it's lost, Google doesn't care. They could care less.
Sure.
Whereas you have backups of it, you have disaster recovery and all those kinds of options as well.
The other thing that they're a financial services company, so they have a lot of federal regulations that they have to follow. They have a ton of ING regulations they have to follow. All their email has to be archived out to a ING certified archive company, so they had no choice but to use Exchange in that specific instance. Okay, the other thing that they did was they took that accordion binder and they basically made that an electronic binder as well. So they converted all those forms that they had to use to PDFs. Those PDFs are available on the Mac server, the Apple server, and then those guys can go out, and they'll take a form out and they'll use Goodreader so that they can access the form from the iPad. They can fill out the form using, what do they use for, do you remember what they use to fill out the forms, their PDFs?
They're using iAnnotate.
iAnnotate, okay. So they're using that so they can fill the form out with the client right then and there, and then they can't use the electronic signing capacity because of the regulations. So what they do is they fill it all out with the client on the iPad, and they email it to the client, and they're normally in their office. The client gets the email, they print it out, they sign it, and they give it back to them, or they sign it later, they scan it and send it back. So that's how they're using it, and being able to basically take the whole paper-based transaction and interaction with that client and convert it electronically.